The drought had lasted 3 months when Sarah Whitfield finally understood what it meant to be truly alone. She stood at the edge of her property, watching the sun bleed orange across the cracked earth, her black mourning dress heavy with dust. The land stretched before her like a broken promise, 40 acres of dying grass and stubborn mesquite that her late husband had sworn would make them rich. "Mama, the last chicken died," little Emma called from the doorway of their weathered cabin. At 7 years old, the girl had already learned not to cry over dead livestock. Out here, tears were as useless as rain clouds that never broke. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the Winchester rifle in her hands. Thomas had taught her to shoot before he taught her to love him, back when they were both young and foolish enough to believe the frontier would bend to their will. Now Thomas lay beneath a wooden cross on the hill, claimed by a cave-in at the Fortuna silver mine 8 months past, and she stood guard over his dream with ammunition running as low as their food stores. "We'll eat the salt pork tonight," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the tightness in her throat. "And tomorrow I'll ride to town." She didn't mention that she had no money for supplies. The mine company had paid out Thomas's death settlement in equipment and livestock, most of which had already been sold or perished. All that remained were 6 head of cattle, too skinny to fetch a fair price, and a mortgage payment due in 2 weeks that might as well have been 2 years for all her ability to meet it. The sun dipped lower, painting long shadows across the yard. Sarah made her final rounds, checking the fence line for breaks. Coyotes had been bold lately, driven desperate by the same drought that plagued every living thing in Cedar Ridge County. She found fresh tracks near the chicken coop, large ones, too big for coyotes. Wolves, perhaps, though they rarely came this close to settlements. Inside, their cabin felt smaller each day. Thomas had built it with his own hands, promising something grander once the mine paid out. The main room served as kitchen, parlor, and Sarah's sewing space. 2 small bedrooms branched off the back one, where Emma slept among her few toys and many questions. The other where Sarah lay awake each night, still reaching for a man who would never again warm the other side of the bed. She prepared their meager supper while Emma set the table with their good plates, the ones Sarah's mother had sent from St. Louis as a wedding gift. Maintaining such small dignities felt important, a bulwark against the creeping wildness that threatened to claim everything refined about their lives. "Mrs. Henderson says you should marry again," Emma announced, arranging forks with precise care. "She says a woman alone ain't proper." "Isn't proper," Sarah corrected automatically. "And Mrs. Henderson should mind her own business." "She says Mr. Harlan would have you. He's got the biggest ranch in the county." Sarah's hand stilled over the salt pork. William Harlan had indeed made his interest known, first with condolences that lasted too long, then with offers to buy her land that grew less generous and more insistent with each refusal. His was a particular kind of frontier courtesy, polite on the surface, but sharp as a skinning knife underneath. "Mr. Harlan wants our water rights," Sarah said carefully. "The spring on our North 40 is the only reliable water for miles. That's what he'd marry, not me." Emma considered this with the solemn wisdom children developed quickly in hard places. "Papa wouldn't like him." "No," Sarah agreed. "He wouldn't." They ate in companionable silence, the salt pork tough but filling. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutters Thomas had never gotten around to fixing. Sarah made a mental note to nail them down tomorrow, adding it to the endless list of tasks that grew faster than she could manage. After supper, she read to Emma from their Bible, one of their few books. The child fell asleep to the rhythm of ancient words, her face peaceful in the lamplight. Sarah carried her to bed, tucking the thin quilt around her small form, and allowed herself a moment to smooth the dark hair from her daughter's forehead. In the main room, she spread her account books across the table. The numbers never lied, no matter how many times she added them. Without a miracle or a sacrifice, they would lose the ranch by month's end. She could sell to Harlan, Accept his grudging offer and use the money to start over somewhere else. Some mining town, perhaps, where a widow could take in washing or run a boarding house. But this land held Thomas's sweat and blood, literally. He'd carved their initials in the big cottonwood by the spring the day they'd claimed the property. He'd built the barn with lumber hauled 40 miles from the nearest sawmill. He'd died trying to secure their future, and abandoning his dream felt like killing him all over again. A sound outside made her look up horses approaching, multiple riders, moving without hurry. Sarah reached for the rifle, checked the load, and stepped onto the porch. 3 men materialized from the darkness, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. She recognized Harlan's foreman, Jake Morrison, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. "Evening, Mrs. Whitfield." Morrison touched his hat brim. "Mister, Harlan sent us to check on you. Worried about a widow woman alone with wolves about." How thoughtful. Sarah kept the rifle easy in her hands, but visible. "You can tell, mister. Harlan, we're managing fine." Morrison's gaze traveled over the shabby cabin, the empty chicken coop, the dying garden. "Don't look fine to me. Looks like a woman who could use some help. The kind of help that comes with conditions." "Everything comes with conditions. Ma'am, that's the nature of business." One of the other riders, younger and nervously fingering his reins, spoke up. "Mister, Harlan says his offer stands. Generous price for the land. Enough to set you and the girl up proper in town." His definition of generous and mine differ considerably. Morrison leaned forward in his saddle, leather creaking. "Pride makes for a cold supper, Mrs. Whitfield, and a dangerous breakfast when you're alone." "Is that a threat, Mr. Morrison?" Friendly advice. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Wolves aren't the only predators in these parts. Sometimes a woman needs protection. Sometimes a woman needs men to respect her property lines. Sarah raised the rifle slightly. "Which you're currently crossing." The tension stretched taut between them before Morrison laughed, a sound like gravel in a pan. "No offense meant. We'll be on our way. But you think on Mr. Harlan's offer. Won't stand forever." They wheeled their horses and disappeared into the darkness, leaving dust and unease in their wake. Sarah remained on the porch until the hoofbeats faded, then checked every window and door twice before retiring. In her bedroom, she opened Thomas's trunk, running her fingers over his few possessions, his Sunday shirt, still smelling faintly of tobacco and honest sweat, the pocket watch his father had carried through the war between the states, the letters he'd written during their brief courtship, when he'd been a young miner with grand dreams and she'd been a school teacher who believed in them. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, lay his Navy Colt revolver. She'd need to learn to use it. She realized the rifle was good for distance, but if Harlan's men came calling again, they might not stop at the porch. Sarah undressed in the dark, saving lamp oil, through the thin walls. She heard Emma murmur in her sleep. Outside, something howled wolf or coyote. She couldn't tell. The sound raised gooseflesh on her arms as she slipped into bed. The drought would break, or it wouldn't. Harlan would press his suit, or he wouldn't. She would find a way to save the ranch, or she wouldn't. But tonight, in this moment, between one heartbreak and the next, Sarah Whitfield allowed herself the luxury of closing her eyes and pretending the other side of the bed still held warmth, that tomorrow would bring rain, that the frontier might yet keep its promises to those brave or foolish enough to believe. The town of Cedar Ridge squatted beneath the morning sun like a dog waiting to bite. Sarah guided her wagon down Main Street. Emma beside her in a dress mended so many times the patches had patches. They'd left before dawn. The 6 scrawny cattle tied behind the wagon, hoping to reach the stockyard before the heat grew unbearable. "Don't stare," Sarah murmured as they passed the Imperial Hotel, where William Harlan held court most mornings. Through the window, she glimpsed him at his usual table, silver-haired, immaculate despite the dust that claimed everyone else. surrounded by men who laughed at his jokes whether they were funny or not. The stockyard manager, a German named Muller, shook his head before Sarah even brought the cattle fully into view. "Mrs. Whitfield, these animals—" He walked around them, prodding ribs that showed too clearly through hide. "In this condition, I can offer perhaps $15 for the lot. They're worth 40 at least." Sarah kept her voice steady, though her stomach dropped. "Good breeding stock once they've had proper feed." "Once they've had feed, yes, but now—" Muller spread his hands. "I'm sorry, $15 is generous." It wasn't even half what she needed for supplies, let alone the mortgage payment. Sarah opened her mouth to argue when a familiar voice cut through the morning air. $25, Muller, and not a penny less. William Harlan emerged from the hotel's shadow, his foreman Morrison trailing behind. Up close, Harlan looked like what he was, a man who'd carved an empire from the frontier's bones and meant to keep it. His suit was Denver-made, his boots polished to a shine that defied the dust, but his eyes remained cold as winter granite. "Mr. Harlan." Muller straightened. "I didn't realize you had an interest in these cattle." "I have an interest in all my neighbors' welfare." Harlan's smile was practiced, political. $25, and Mrs. Whitfield can put it toward her accounts at the general store. Sarah's jaw tightened. Accepting his charity would put her in his debt, exactly where he wanted her. But Emma needed shoes, and they were down to their last sack of flour. "That's kind of you, Mr. Harlan, but—" "Nonsense. Thomas was a good man. It's the Christian thing to do." He nodded to Muller, who hurried to count out the money. "In fact, why don't you and Emma join me for breakfast? The Imperial serves decent eggs." "We've eaten, thank you." "Coffee, then. Surely you won't deny me the pleasure of your company for coffee." It wasn't a request. Sarah felt the weight of eyes upon them, shopkeepers peering from doorways, women pausing their errands to whisper. In a town like Cedar Ridge, refusing William Harlan publicly was almost as dangerous as accepting him. 10 minutes, she said. "Emma, stay with the wagon." "The child should eat," Harlan insisted. "Growing girls need proper nutrition." And so Sarah found herself seated in the Imperial's dining room, watching Emma devour scrambled eggs while Harlan held court. He spoke of cattle prices and railroad expansion, of the town's future prosperity, all while his pale eyes never left Sarah's face. "You're struggling," he said finally, waving away her protests. "No shame in it. This drought has broken stronger operations than yours, but there are solutions. Such as selling you my land for half its value. Such as accepting the protection of a man who understands this country." He leaned back, silver watch chain glinting. "You're an educated woman, Mrs. Whitfield. Surely you see the writing on the wall. A widow with a child, trying to run a ranch alone, it's not sustainable. Other widows manage. Other widows don't have what you have." His voice dropped, intimate despite the public setting. "That spring on your property is worth more than gold in this drought. Men have killed for less." "Is that a threat?" "It's reality." He signaled the waiter for more coffee. "I'm offering you a dignified solution. Marriage would protect you, provide for Emma, preserve your reputation." Sarah thought of Thomas, of how he'd proposed by the same spring Harlan now coveted. They'd been young and poor, but rich in dreams, planning a future that had crumbled with a mine shaft. "I need time to consider," she said carefully. "Time is a luxury you can't afford." Harlan's genial mask slipped slightly. "The banknote comes due in 2 weeks. I happen to know you're behind on your account at Henderson's store. How long before people stop extending credit to a woman with no prospects?" As if on cue, Mrs. Henderson appeared at their table, her pinched face bright with curiosity. "Mr. Harlan, Mrs. Whitfield, how unexpected." "Mrs. Whitfield and I were discussing business," Harlan said smoothly. "Perhaps you could extend her credit line another month. I'll personally guarantee it." The trap closed neat as a snare. Refusing now would insult both Harlan and Mrs. Henderson, whose store provided their necessities. Sarah forced a smile. That's very generous. Think nothing of it. Harlan rose, dropping coins on the table. I'll call on you tomorrow to continue our discussion. Good day, ladies. He left them to navigate the treacherous waters of Mrs. Henderson's interrogation. The older woman's questions came wrapped in concern, but aimed like arrows. Such a generous man, and still handsome for his age. Indeed. Sarah helped Emma from her chair. Of course. There's talk about him calling on you. People do gossip, so people should find better occupations. Mrs. Henderson's eyes glittered. A woman in your position can't afford to be too proud. Think of your daughter. I think of nothing else. They escaped to find a small crowd gathered around their wagon. Reverend Pike stood at its center, his black coat dusty and his face grave with Christian concern. Mrs. Whitfield, I've been meaning to call. His voice carried the weight of moral authority. Your absence from services has been noted. Emma was ill last Sunday. Sarah lied smoothly. And the Sunday before, and before that. The Reverend stepped closer, lowering his voice. Grief is understandable, but isolation breeds unwholesome thoughts. A woman alone, especially one receiving male visitors at odd hours. What male visitors? But Sarah knew. Morrison's visit 2 nights ago had been seen, reported, twisted. I only relay what concerned citizens tell me. For your own good, you must consider your position. Mr. Harlan's offer is generous. Mr. Harlan's offer is his business and mine. Sarah cut him off, anger finally breaking through. Good day, Reverend. She helped Emma into the wagon and snapped the reins harder than necessary. Behind them. She felt the town's judgment like heat on her back. By evening, the story would have grown the widow Whitfield, too proud to accept help, entertaining men at night, corrupting her daughter with unwomanly independence. At Henderson's store, she spent Harlan's $25, carefully flour, salt, coffee, beans, ammunition. Mrs. Henderson tallied the purchases with pursed lips, making clear that Harlan's guarantee was all that stood between Sarah and starvation. I have some older bread, the woman said grudgingly. Day old, but still good. It was the first kindness she'd shown, small as it was. Sarah accepted it with quiet thanks, understanding that even this came with conditions, the expectation that she would see sense, accept Harlan, become respectable again. The ride home stretched long beneath the climbing sun. Emma dozed against her shoulder while Sarah's mind turned over their options like cards in a bad hand. Sell to Harlan and betray Thomas's memory. Marry Harlan and lose herself. Fight Harlan and risk everything. As they crested the final hill before home, Sarah saw dust rising from their property. Her heart lurched, hands tightening on the reins, but it was only a lone rider at their gate, dismounting with the careful movements of exhaustion. A drifter, from the look of him. Worn clothes, worn saddle, worn face beneath a hat that had seen better decades. His horse stood head down, ribs showing through its coat like the cattle she'd just sold. Ma'am, he touched his hat brim as they approached. Sorry to trouble you. I'm looking for water for my horse, maybe a day's work for a meal. Sarah studied him carefully. His holsters were empty. Guns likely sold for food. His hands showed calluses, but no cruel marks. His eyes held weariness, but no meanness. What kind of work can you do? Whatever needs doing. I can mend fence, tend stock, fix what's broken. He paused. I'm good with horses, if you have any need breaking. Can't pay wages, Sarah said bluntly. Said I'd work for food. He glanced at Emma, something softening in his weathered face. Been a while since I had a proper meal. Sarah knew she should send him on. A strange man on the property would fuel more gossip. But the broken fence stretched for miles. The barn door hung crooked. and she was tired of facing it all alone. Water your horse. She decided, there's salt pork and beans for supper if you can fix the barn door before dark. Yes, ma'am. Name's Foster. Jake Foster. Sarah Whitfield. This is Emma. She climbed down from the wagon. The spring's behind the cottonwood. Don't muddy it upstream. As Foster led his horse away, Emma tugged her sleeve. Is he a good man or a bad man? Sarah watched the stranger's careful handling of his exhausted mount, the way he checked the animal's hooves before his own thirst. I don't know yet, but sometimes we have to take chances. Like Papa did with the mine. The innocent question cut deep. Thomas had taken a chance, and it had killed him. But staying safe was killing them slowly, one humiliation at a time. Yes, Sarah said finally. Like Papa did. The stranger who called himself Jake Foster turned out to be a liar. His name was Caleb Morgan, and Sarah discovered this 3 days later when she found him burning a wanted poster in her barn. The paper crumbled to ash before she could read the details, but she'd seen enough his face sketched in harsh lines. The word wanted bold across the top. I'll be gone within the hour, he said without turning around. He'd heard her footsteps, probably heard her sharp intake of breath too. Just let me saddle up. Sarah stood in the barn doorway, one hand on the Winchester she'd taken to carrying everywhere. Morning light slanted through the gaps in the wallboards, illuminating dust motes and the broad set of his shoulders. 3 days he'd been here. 3 days of watching him work with steady patience, fixing what Thomas never had time to repair. 3 days of Emma chattering at him over supper while he listened with grave attention. What did you do? She asked finally. He turned then, and she saw something in his eyes she recognized the weight of actions that couldn't be undone. Does it matter? You're on my land, around my daughter. Yes, it matters. Caleb nodded slowly, respecting the directness. Killed a man in Amarillo. He drew first, but he had friends in high places. Judge didn't care much for self-defense when it came from a drifter. Is that the truth? Part of it. He moved to his saddle, checking the cinch with practiced hands. The whole truth is uglier and longer. Man I killed had been following me for weeks. Unfinished business from the war. Which side? Does that matter either? Sarah considered. The war had ended 30 years ago, but its ghosts still walked. Not to me. He stopped then, hands stilling on the leather. Why? Because you fixed my barn door, because you taught Emma to whistle, because... She paused, surprised by her own honesty. Because I'm tired of being alone. The words hung between them like smoke. Caleb studied her face, reading something there that made him set down the saddle. Harlan came by yesterday, he said carefully. While you were in the East Field. Sarah's stomach tightened. What did he want? To know who I was, what I was doing here. Caleb leaned against a stall post, offered me $50 to move on. $100 if I'd spread word in town that you'd been entertaining me improper. Heat flooded her cheeks. What did you tell him? Told him to get off your property before I helped him off. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Don't think he's used to being refused. No, he's not. Sarah lowered the rifle slightly. Is that why you're leaving Harlan? I'm leaving because staying brings trouble to your door. You got enough of that already. What if I said I didn't care? Then I'd say you're not thinking clear. He gestured toward the house where Emma was likely just waking. You got her to consider. Sarah followed his gaze, then made a decision that surprised them both. Stay another week. Get the fence line secure before you go. I'll pay you fair wages. You don't have wages to pay. I'll have something after I sell the preserves in town. That's honest work for honest pay. Nothing improper about it. Caleb studied her for a long moment. You know what you're risking. I know what I'm already losing, Sarah countered. At least this way. Something gets fixed in the process. He picked up a hammer, testing its weight. That poster there might be others looking. Bounty hunters. Men worse than Harlan. Then we'll deal with them when they come. Sarah surprised herself with the we. For now, there's work needs doing. She left him in the barn and returned to the house to find Emma already at the table, attempting to braid her own hair. Sarah took over, fingers working the familiar pattern while her mind raced. "Is Mr. Foster staying?" Emma asked. Sarah hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Mr. Morgan. His name is Caleb Morgan, and yes, for a little while." Why did he lie about his name? Sometimes people need a fresh start. Sometimes the past follows too close. Emma considered this with 7-year-old solemnity. Like when Billy Henderson said I was poor trash and I told teacher he wet himself during the Christmas play. Not quite the same, but yes. Sarah tied off the braid. "Mr. Morgan has had some troubles, but I think he's a good man who's made some hard choices. Papa said good men sometimes do bad things when the world squeezes them too tight." Sarah's hand stilled. Thomas had said that, usually when discussing mine owners or railroad barons. She wondered what he would think of her decision to harbor a wanted man. Probably he'd understand. Thomas had always seen the gray between black and white. After breakfast, she set Emma to her lessons while she worked on preserving the last of the summer vegetables. Through the kitchen window, she watched Caleb moving along the fence line. He worked with economy, no wasted motion, the way men learned when every calorie counted. Occasionally he'd pause, scanning the horizon with an alertness that spoke of years watching for trouble. Near midday, dust rose in the distance. Sarah's hand found the rifle before the riders came clear, 2 men, moving fast. She stepped onto the porch as they thundered into the yard. Not Harlan's men. These wore the tired, hard look of professionals, bounty hunters. Mrs. Whitfield. The lead rider stayed mounted, hand resting casual on his pistol. "Name's Dixon. This is my associate, Mr. Crane. We're looking for a man might have passed this way." "Lots of men pass this way." Sarah kept her voice steady. "It's the only water for 20 miles. Dixon smiled, showing too many teeth. "This one's particular, about 6 foot dark hair, scar through his left eyebrow, goes by various names." From the corner of her eye, Sarah saw Caleb emerge from behind the barn, rifle in hand. The hunters hadn't spotted him yet. "Haven't seen anyone like that." She lied smooth as Sunday linen. Crane shifted in his saddle. "Funny thing, track we've been following leads right to your gate. As I said, men water here. They don't always introduce themselves." Dixon's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we look around?" "I do mind. This is private property." "Now, ma'am, we don't want trouble." "Then you should leave." Caleb stepped into view, rifle aimed steady. "Lady asked you polite." Both hunters tensed, hands twitching toward weapons. Dixon's smile widened. Well, well, Caleb Morgan, been a long chase." "Not long enough, apparently." "Bounty's $500. Crane offered, like it was a conversation. "Split 3 ways. That's good money. The lady could use it, from the look of things." Sarah felt disgust rise like bile. "Get off my land." "Ma'am, you're protecting a killer." "I'm protecting a man who's harmed no one here." She raised her own rifle. "Which is more than I can say for you if you don't move on." Dixon's face hardened. "You're making a mistake. We'll be back with the sheriff." "Sheriff owes me 2 favors and likes Harlan less than I do," Sarah bluffed. "Try your luck." The hunters exchanged glances, calculating odds. 2 rifles against 2 pistols. Poor angles for a quick draw. After a tense moment, Dixon touched his hat brim with mocking courtesy. "This isn't over, Morgan." They wheeled their horses and left at a gallop, dust swirling in their wake. Sarah didn't lower her rifle until they vanished over the rise. "They'll be back," Caleb said quietly, "with more men or the law." "I know." Sarah surprised herself by not caring. "Emma, get inside." Her daughter obeyed without argument. recognizing the tone when they were alone. Sarah turned to face Caleb fully. Up close, she could see the scar Dixon mentioned, a white line through dark brow. Could see, too, the weariness that ran deeper than physical exhaustion. "Why did you step out?" she asked. "Could have stayed hidden." "Could have." He lowered his rifle but didn't relax. "Didn't seem right, letting you face them alone." "I've been facing things alone for 8 months. Doesn't mean you should have to." They stood there in the bright sun, studying each other with new understanding. Sarah saw a man who'd chosen to risk capture rather than let her stand alone. Caleb saw a woman who'd lied to armed men without flinching. "This changes things," he said finally. "Does it? You still need work. I still need help. Everything else is just complications." Hell of a complication, harboring a fugitive. "Language," she chided automatically, then felt foolish. The man was wanted for murder and she was worried about propriety. He almost smiled. "Apologies, ma'am." "Sarah," she corrected. "If we're going to face down bounty hunters together, you should probably use my name." "Sarah." He tested it carefully, like tasting unfamiliar food. "This is dangerous ground you're choosing, as opposed to the safe ground where Harlan forces me into marriage or off my land." She shook her head. "I'll take my chances with honest danger." "From the house," Emma's voice called nervously. Sarah knew she should go comfort her daughter, explain what she could, but something held her there, standing close enough to Caleb to see flecks of gold in his brown eyes, to smell the honest sweat and leather scent of him. "1 week," she said. "Fix what you can. After that, we'll see." "We'll see," he repeated, and for the first time since Thomas died, Sarah felt like someone else was truly seeing her, not the widow, not the struggling woman alone, but herself, complicated and capable and still standing. She turned toward the house, then paused. "The preserves will be ready day after tomorrow. I'll need help loading them for market." "I'll be here." The simple promise carried weight beyond its words. Sarah nodded and went to tend her daughter, leaving Caleb standing in the yard. A man caught between running and staying, between the safety of solitude and the dangerous warmth of being needed. The week stretched into 2, then 3, and still Caleb Morgan remained. Each morning Sarah told herself this would be the day she'd find him gone. Saddle and man vanished like smoke. Each morning she found him already at work, mending what was broken, strengthening what was weak. The rhythm of shared labor became its own language. Sarah would look up from her wash to find Caleb watching her. Then both would turn away, careful not to acknowledge what simmered beneath the surface. Emma served as unknowing chaperone, chattering between them like a creek over stones, binding them with her innocent affection. "Mr. Morgan's teaching me to rope," Emma announced one evening, demonstrating with a length of worn hemp. "He says I got natural talent." "Does he now?" Sarah served the stew, noting how their portions had grown slightly fuller. The preserves had sold well, and Caleb had snared 2 rabbits that morning. "Says she's got good hands," Caleb confirmed, accepting his bowl with a nod. "Steady and patient. Make a fine ranch hand someday." Emma beamed. "When I grow up, I'm going to have 100 horses and never have to wear dresses." "We'll discuss that when you're grown," Sarah said, but she was smiling. It had been too long since Emma had dreamed beyond tomorrow. After supper, while Emma practiced her letters, Sarah found herself beside Caleb on the porch steps. The evening painted the land in softer shades, almost beautiful if you could forget the drought's grip. "Bounty hunters haven't returned," she observed. "They will, or others like them." He whittled a piece of oak, shaping something that might become a toy for Emma. "Dixon's not the type to give up easy." "Are you trying to frighten me into sending you away?" "Trying to keep you clear-eyed about what's coming." Sarah pulled her shawl tighter. "I've been clear-eyed since the day they brought Thomas home on a board. I know what the world does to people who aren't strong enough or mean enough or rich enough to matter." That why you're letting me stay to spite the world?" She considered the question, watching his hands work the wood with practiced care. "Maybe partly, but mostly," she paused, searching for truth. "Mostly because you look at Emma like she's worth protecting, because you work like the land matters, because when I'm near you, I remember I'm more than just a widow trying to survive." The whittling stopped. Caleb set down the knife and wood, turning to face her fully. In the dying light, his eyes held depth she wanted to explore. "Sarah," he started, then stopped. "I've got blood on my hands. Not just from Amarillo, the war, the years after I've done things that wake me at night. We all have our ghosts, Caleb. Not like mine." He looked away. "You deserve better than a broken-down gun hand bringing trouble to your door. What I deserve and what I need might be different things." Sarah surprised herself by reaching out, touching his arm. "Stay. Not because I'm paying you. Not because there's work. Stay because..." His voice had gone rough. "Because I'm asking you to." The space between them hummed with possibility. Caleb's hand covered hers, calloused and warm. For a moment, Sarah thought he might kiss her, and she knew she wouldn't pull away. Then Emma's voice broke the spell. "Mama, I can't spell necessary." Sarah withdrew her hand, face flushing. "Coming, sweetheart." But she felt Caleb's gaze follow her inside, heavy with promises neither dared speak aloud. The next morning brought trouble in a different form. Sarah was hanging wash when she spotted the buggy approaching Reverend Pike with Mrs. Henderson and 2 other town matrons, faces set in lines of Christian determination. "Sarah," she called through the window. "We have visitors." He appeared from the barn, took in the situation with one glance, and melted back into shadow. Sarah smoothed her apron and met them at the gate. "Reverend, ladies, what brings you out?" "Concern for your immortal soul," Reverend Pike intoned, "and your daughter's welfare." Mrs. Henderson couldn't wait to elaborate. "The entire town knows you're harboring that man, living in sin, corrupting your child." "Mr. Morgan works for me." Sarah interrupted. "He sleeps in the barn, takes his meals with us as any hired hand would. There's nothing improper." "The appearance of impropriety is as damaging as the sin itself." One of the other women sniffed. "What example are you setting?" "An example of hard work and survival. An example of wanton behavior," Reverend Pike corrected. "I'm here to offer Christian guidance. Send this man away. Accept Mr. Harlan's proposal and return to the fold of respectability." "Mr. Harlan's proposal comes with conditions I find unacceptable. Pride goeth before a fall, Mrs. Whitfield." "Then I'll fall on my own terms." "Mrs." Henderson gasped at such blasphemy. "Think of your daughter already," the children whisper. "Soon no decent family will associate with her." That struck home. Sarah felt the barbs sink deep, poisoning her resolve. Was she being selfish, choosing her own heart over Emma's future? "Furthermore," Reverend Pike continued, warming to his theme, "if you persist in this scandalous arrangement, I'll have no choice but to speak to the sheriff about the man you're harboring. I believe there are questions about his past." "Get out." The words came from behind Sarah. Caleb stood there, having approached silent as smoke. His hand didn't touch his gun, but the threat radiated from every line of his body. "Mr. Morgan," the Reverend sputtered, "this is a private conversation." "On private property. The lady asked you to leave." "Now see here." Caleb took one step forward. Just one. But the Reverend scrambled back into his buggy like the ground had caught fire. The women followed, clutching their virtue like shields. "This isn't over," Reverend Pike called as they retreated. "The sheriff will hear of this." They left in a cloud of dust and indignation. Sarah stood trembling, whether from anger or fear she couldn't tell. "I've made it worse," Caleb said quietly. They'll come back with the law now. Let them come. Sarah's voice surprised her with its steel. I'm tired of being pushed and preached at. What about Emma? They're not wrong about how the town will treat her. Sarah looked toward the house where her daughter watched from the window. I'll teach her myself. Better that than letting her grow up thinking a woman's only value is in who she marries. That's a hard row to hoe. Everything out here is hard. She turned to face him. Are you trying to talk me out of keeping you? Trying to make sure you understand the cost. I understood the cost the day Thomas died. Every choice since has been about which price I'm willing to pay. She met his eyes steadily. You're worth the price. Caleb Morgan. Something shifted in his face, a wall crumbling. You barely know me. I know enough. She moved closer. I know you're gentle with Emma, but would kill to protect her. I know you work like the land means something. I know when you look at me, you see me, not the widow, not the woman alone, but me. Sarah. His hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I've got nothing to offer but trouble. I've got plenty of trouble already. Might as well have some company facing it. This time, nothing interrupted. Caleb bent his head and kissed her, soft at first, then deeper as she responded. Sarah's hands found his shoulders, solid and real. The kiss tasted of possibility, of second chances, of defiance against everyone who would deny them this sweetness. When they parted, Sarah felt dizzy, awakened. Stay, she whispered. Not in the barn. Stay. The talk. There's already talk. At least this would make it true. Caleb pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. You're sure? I'm sure I'm tired of being afraid. I'm sure I'm tired of being alone. I'm sure that whatever time we have, I want to spend it with you. From the house, Emma called. Mama, the bread's burning. Sarah laughed, surprising them both. Whatever time we have, she repeated, between burnt bread and bounty hunters. That night, after Emma slept, Caleb came to the house. They sat by the dying fire, not touching but aware of every breath between them. I need to tell you about Amarillo, he said finally. All of it. So he did. The man he'd killed had been part of a group that had murdered Caleb's brother during the war's aftermath. Years of tracking, of cold camps and colder purpose. The final confrontation in a saloon, blood on sawdust, and the hollow victory of revenge achieved. I thought killing him would bring peace. Caleb finished. Just brought more ghosts. Sarah took his hand. Maybe peace isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about finding something worth more than the past. Is that what this is? I hope so. She squeezed his fingers. I pray so. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, while outside the wind tested the walls and found them strong enough. For now. The fire started just after midnight. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke and Caleb's hand on her shoulder, his voice urgent but calm. Get Emma. Get out. Through the window, orange light danced across the yard. The barn was ablaze, flames licking hungry at the sky. Sarah grabbed Emma, still drowsy with sleep, while Caleb buckled on his gun belt with practiced speed. Stay in the house, he ordered, but Sarah was already reaching for the rifle. Like hell. They burst into the yard together. Dark figures moved against the firelight, 4 men, maybe 5. Caleb fired first, dropping one who'd been splashing kerosene on the chicken coop. Sarah took cover behind the water trough. Emma pressed close beside her. Morgan, Morrison's voice rang out. Mister, Harlan sends his regards. Caleb had made it to the corner of the house, using the shadows. Harlan too yellow to do his own burning. Just business. You can walk away. Both of you. Take the girl and go. This is our home, Sarah shouted back, anger overriding fear. Not anymore. Another man emerged from behind the burning barn, torch in hand. Shame if the house caught too. Sarah shot him. The Winchester kicked against her shoulder as the man spun and fell, torch rolling harmless in the dirt. She worked the lever, chambering another round, surprised by her own steadiness. "Mama," Emma whispered, terrified. "Close your eyes, baby. It'll be over soon." But Morrison had brought enough men. They came from multiple directions. Using the smoke and chaos, Sarah saw Caleb drop another, then pivot to face two more. The firefight turned brutal, close quarters and desperate. A figure loomed from the smoke. Dixon, the bounty hunter. He must have thrown in with Morrison for a chance at Caleb. Sarah swung the rifle, but he was too fast, knocking it aside and grabbing for her. She fought dirty, the way frontier women learned, nails, teeth, knees, whatever it took. But Dixon was stronger, meaner. He got her down, hand around her throat. Then suddenly his weight was gone. Caleb had Dixon by the collar, hauling him back. The two men grappled, crashed into the fence. Sarah scrambled for the rifle as more shots cracked across the yard. "The spring," Morrison was shouting. "Get to the spring and poison it!" Horror flooded through Sarah. Without the spring, the land was worthless. She left Emma huddled behind the trough and ran, knowing Caleb was too engaged with Dixon to stop them. Two men were already at the spring, one holding a bag of what looked like lye. Sarah didn't hesitate. The rifle cracked once, twice. One man toppled into the water. The other dove for cover, abandoning the poison. Behind her, the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks. By its light, she saw Caleb and Dixon still fighting, brutal and ugly. Morrison was rallying his remaining men for another rush. Then new gunfire erupted from the road. Riders poured into the yard, not more of Harlan's men but others. Sarah recognized Jake Foster's weathered face, the real Jake Foster who'd passed through months ago. Behind him rode three more men, all armed, all shooting at Morrison's crew. "Heard there was trouble," Foster called, putting a bullet uncomfortably close to Morrison's head. "Thought you might need help." The tide turned. Morrison's men, caught between multiple guns, broke and ran. Morrison himself backed toward his horse, snarling. "This isn't over. Whitfield, Harlan owns this county." "Not anymore," Foster said grimly. "Word's out about his land grabs. The families he's burned out. Federal marshals coming to investigate. You might want to be elsewhere when he arrives." Morrison's face went pale beneath the soot. He mounted and spurred away, his remaining men scattering like quail. Sarah turned to find Caleb standing over Dixon's still form. Blood ran from a cut above his eye, and he favored his left side. But he was alive. Their eyes met across the smoke-filled yard. "Emma," she breathed. "Here, Mama." Her daughter emerged from behind the trough, dirty but unharmed. Foster dismounted, surveying the damage. "Sorry we didn't get here sooner. Been tracking Morrison's bunch since they burned out the Hendricks family 3 days back. Finally caught up." The Hendrickses. Sarah knew them, good people, with 3 young children. "Safe in town, but their place is gone." Foster spat. "Harlan's been busy, too busy. Made folks mad enough to fight back." One of Foster's companions, a younger man with kind eyes, knelt beside the wounded. "This one's still breathing," he said of the man Sarah had shot. "Couple others, too. Take them to town." Foster decided, "Let the sheriff sort it out, though I suspect Sheriff Masters will be looking for new employment once that federal marshal arrives." As the men worked to secure prisoners and fight the remaining fires, Caleb approached Sarah. Up close, she could see he was hurt worse than he'd let on. Blood soaked his shirt along his ribs. "You're wounded." "I'll keep." He touched her face gently. "You all right?" "I shot a man, maybe killed him. To protect what's yours. Nothing wrong in that." Sarah leaned into his touch. "Is it over?" "This part." He glanced at Dixon's body. "My past is done chasing me. Harlan's finished in this county, but you just stood up to the most powerful man in the territory. Shot his men? That makes you notorious. Sarah Whitfield. She surprised herself by laughing, wild and free. Good. I'm tired of being respectable anyway. Foster approached, hat in hand. Ma'am, me and the boys will help rebuild your barn. Least we can do. Community's got to stick together against men like Harlan. That's kind of you, Mr. Foster. Jake's fine. He grinned. Besides, way I hear it, you make the best preserves in the county. Man's got to eat. As dawn broke gray and smoky, Sarah surveyed her property. The barn was gone. Reduced to blackened timber, bullet holes pocked the house walls. Bodies and blood marked her yard. But the spring ran clear, the house stood strong, and her family for Caleb was family now. Claimed in fire and lead remained whole. Emma tugged her sleeve. Are the bad men gone? These ones are... Sarah pulled her daughter close. There might be others, someday. But we'll be ready. Because we're strong. Sarah looked at Caleb, who despite his wounds was already planning where to build the new barn. At Foster and his men, who'd risked their lives for neighbors. At her own hands, steady on the rifle, defending what mattered. Because we're not alone, she corrected, and that makes us stronger than they'll ever be. The sun climbed higher, burning off the smoke, revealing the damage but also the possibilities. They had work ahead rebuilding, healing, facing whatever legal challenges remained. But for the first time since Thomas died, Sarah felt truly alive. Not just surviving, but living, with all the danger and sweetness that entailed. Caleb caught her watching and smiled. That rare expression that transformed his weathered face. She smiled back, uncaring who saw or what they'd say. Let them talk. She'd earned her notorious reputation, paid for it in blood and fire. And she'd defend it the same way, with this man beside her and their daughter between them, building something worth fighting for on this unforgiving land. The storm rolled in 3 nights after the fire, thunder shaking the wounded house like God's own judgment. Sarah lay awake, listening to the rain pound the roof Thomas had built, feeling the empty space beside her where Caleb should be. He'd returned to sleeping in what remained of the barn, insisting on propriety now that Foster's men came by daily to help rebuild. Can't give them more cause to talk, he'd said, and she'd hated the distance in his voice, the wall rebuilding between them. Now, with lightning illuminating her bedroom in stark flashes, Sarah made a decision. She wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and stepped into the storm. The barn's skeleton provided little shelter. She found Caleb sitting up in the hayloft, favoring his wounded side, watching the rain through gaps in the half-built walls. You'll catch your death, he said without turning. So will you. She climbed the ladder carefully, dress heavy with rain. This is foolish. Caleb. What is... But his voice held the weight of knowing. This distance, this pretending. She settled beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. We faced down killers together. I shot a man for you, for us. And now you sleep out here like a stranger. Sarah, I'm tired of being careful. The words spilled out, fierce as the storm. Tired of measuring every action against what others might think. They burned our barn. Caleb, they tried to poison our water. What more can they do? Take Emma, he said quietly. The law could take her. Say you're unfit, a woman living in sin, harboring fugitives. Living. Sarah interrupted. That's the word that matters. For the first time in months, I'm living. She turned to face him fully. I love you. The words hung between them, bright as lightning. Caleb's breath caught. I know it's too soon, Sarah continued. Know it's reckless and improper and everything they say, but I loved Thomas for 6 years, and it was good and safe and steady. This what I feel for you, it's different. It's fire and choice and being truly seen. And I'd rather have one night of that than a lifetime of empty propriety. Sarah! Her name broke from him like a prayer. I'm no good for you. I've got blood on my hands and shadows in my past. And I've got grave dirt under my nails and a heart I thought was buried with my husband." She touched his face, feeling the roughness of stubble, the warmth of skin. "We're both broken. Caleb, maybe that's why we fit." He caught her hand, pressed it flat against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat, wild as her own. "If I truly stay, I'll never leave. You understand I'm not a man who loves by halves?" "Good. Neither am I." The storm crashed around them, but in the small shelter of the loft, there was sudden stillness. Caleb drew her close, kissed her with all the hunger of their days of careful distance. Sarah responded with equal fervor, pouring all her grief and hope and fierce desire into the connection between them. When they parted, both breathing hard, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "Marry me," he said roughly. "Tomorrow, today, as soon as we can find someone to speak the words." "Yes." No hesitation, no doubt. "Yes." He kissed her again, softer this time, sealing the promise. Then, despite the impropriety, despite the talk it would cause, he followed her back to the house. They were done pretending, done apologizing for choosing life over mere existence. But morning brought complications, as morning always did. Sarah woke to find Caleb already up, standing tense at the window. Outside, a single rider approached, not hostile, but official, the federal marshal Foster had mentioned. "Get dressed," Caleb said quietly. "This could go badly." Marshal Bennett turned out to be younger than expected, with intelligent eyes and a manner that suggested he missed nothing. He accepted coffee, complimented Sarah's housekeeping, and made friends with Emma before getting to business. "I've been investigating William Harlan's activities," he said directly. "The attack on your property, the other families burned out. I'll need statements from both of you." They told their story while Bennett took notes in precise handwriting. When they finished, he set down his pen. "Mr. Morgan, I'm aware there's a warrant for you in Amarillo." Caleb didn't flinch. "Yes, sir. I've looked into that situation. Seems the judge who issued that warrant has his own troubles now. Taking bribes, falsifying records. Several of his convictions are being reviewed." Bennett paused. "Yours included." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest, but Caleb remained cautious. "Meaning?" "Meaning I have no interest in pursuing old warrants based on questionable evidence. My concern is current crime." He turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Whitfield, you shot a man during the attack. He survived, and he's talking. Says Harlan paid them to burn you out." "Then why isn't Harlan arrested?" Sarah demanded. "Because his lawyers are very good and his connections run deep. But," Bennett smiled thinly, "those connections don't extend to federal jurisdiction. I'm building a case. Your testimony, the other families, the survivors willing to talk, it's adding up." "How long?" Caleb asked. "Weeks, maybe months. Harlan won't go quietly." Bennett stood. "In the meantime, I'd advise caution. And Mr. Morgan, I'd suggest you stay close. I may need your testimony as well." After he left, Sarah and Caleb stood in the kitchen, processing this new development. "He's giving us legitimacy," Sarah realized, "making you a witness instead of a fugitive." Maybe. Caleb still looked wary, or setting a trap. "You don't trust him." "I don't trust anyone who wears a badge. Present company accepted," he added, seeing her expression. "But I'll stay. Testify if needed. For you." "For us," Sarah corrected, then remembered their storm-born promise. "We need to find a preacher. Reverend Pike won't do it." "Then we'll find another. Ride to the next town if we must." She took his hand. "I meant what I said. Caleb, I want to be your wife." "Even if it causes more trouble." "Especially then. I'm developing a taste for trouble." But trouble found them first. That afternoon, while Caleb worked with Foster's men on the barn, Harlan himself appeared. Not with gunmen this time, but with lawyers and papers and the cold confidence of a man who'd bought his way out of tighter spots. Sarah met him at the gate, rifle in hand as always. "Mr. Harlan, surprised you'd show your face here." "Business, Mrs. Whitfield. Always business." He gestured to one of his lawyers, who stepped forward with documents. "I'm prepared to make one final offer. Twice what your land is worth. Cash today." "No. You haven't heard the alternative." His smile was winter cold. "If you refuse, I'll tie this property up in legal challenges for years. Water rights disputes, boundary questions, liens for damages my men allegedly suffered here. You'll spend every cent fighting me in court." "Your men attacked us." "Prove it. My men say they were here on legitimate business when you and your companion opened fire. Several are prepared to testify to that effect." Sarah felt the trap closing but refused to show fear. "The marshal has an investigation that might take years. Can you last years, Mrs. Whitfield? Can your daughter—" Caleb appeared beside her, silent and dangerous. Harlan's lawyer stepped back, but Harlan himself didn't flinch. "Ah, the notorious Mr. Morgan. I could make your troubles disappear too. Money opens many doors, clears many records." "Not interested?" Caleb said flatly. "No, then consider this: I have influence in many places. Judges, sheriffs, even federal marshals can be reached. Your woman's reputation is already ruined. How much worse could it get?" "You threatening her?" Caleb's voice had gone deadly quiet. "Offering options. Business requires flexibility." Harlan adjusted his coat. 3 days, Mrs. Whitfield. Consider my offer. After that, things become complicated." They left in their fancy carriage, dust settling like defeat in their wake. Sarah lowered the rifle, hands trembling slightly. "He means it," she said. "He'll destroy us with paper instead of bullets." "Let him try." But Caleb looked troubled. "Sarah, maybe—" "Don't!" She turned fierce eyes on him. "Don't you dare suggest I run. This is our land, our home." "Our fight," he agreed, pulling her close. "Just wanted to be sure you understood the stakes." "I've always understood. The only thing that's changed is now I have someone fighting beside me." That night, they made plans. Not just for defense, but for the future rebuilding, expanding, the life they'd create together if given the chance. Emma listened with bright eyes, asking when she could call Caleb Papa. "Soon," Sarah promised, watching Caleb's face transform at the word. "Very soon." But first, they had to survive Harlan's next move, and somewhere in the storm-washed darkness, Sarah knew the land baron was planning something worse than fire or lead. He'd attack with law and money and influence weapons against which rifles offered no defense. Still, as she lay beside Caleb that night, propriety be damned, she felt no regret. Whatever came, they'd face it together, and that truth, spoken in lightning and sealed in defiance, was worth any price the world demanded. The courthouse in Cedar Ridge had never seen such a crowd. Every bench was filled, people standing along the walls. More gathered outside despite the noon heat. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, back straight, wearing her best dress, the black one finally retired for blue calico that brought out her eyes. Beside her, Caleb looked uncomfortable in a borrowed suit, but his presence steadied her. Across the aisle, William Harlan commanded his own table, surrounded by 3 lawyers from Denver. His silver hair gleamed, his confidence untouched by the federal investigation that had brought them here. "All rise," the bailiff called. "The Honorable Judge Samuel Thornton presiding." Judge Thornton, brought in from the territorial capital, looked like a man who'd seen every trick and lie the frontier could produce. He settled behind the bench with economical movements. "This hearing will address the matter of water rights and property boundaries concerning the Whitfield Ranch and Mr. William Harlan's adjoining properties." His voice carried despite its quiet tone. We'll also hear evidence regarding alleged criminal activities connected to these disputes. Harlan's lead lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Dobson, stood immediately. Your Honor, we object to the characterization of criminal activities. My client is a respected businessman. Your objection is noted and overruled. Sit down, Mr. Dobson. Sarah felt a flutter of hope. At least this judge wouldn't be easily bought. The morning progressed with tedious legal arguments about surveys and deeds. Harlan's lawyers produced documents suggesting Thomas had agreed to sell the water rights before his death, forgeries. Sarah knew, but clever ones. They painted her as a hysterical widow clinging to property she couldn't manage, making bad decisions influenced by a violent drifter. Then Marshal Bennett was called. He testified to his investigation, the pattern of burned homesteads, the testimonies he'd gathered. Harlan's lawyers attacked his credibility, suggested federal overreach, but Bennett remained unshakable. Mrs. Whitfield, Judge Thornton finally called. Please take the stand. Sarah's hands trembled as she was sworn in, but her voice came clear. She told it all: Thomas's death, the struggle to keep the ranch, Harlan's escalating pressure, the night of the fire, when Dobson cross-examined, trying to paint her as compromised by her relationship with Caleb. She met his insinuations head-on. Yes, I love Caleb Morgan, she stated, causing whispers through the crowd. But that has nothing to do with Mr. Harlan trying to steal my land. You admit to living in sin with a wanted man. I admit to accepting help from a good man who defended my property against criminals. Your Honor, another voice interrupted. Jake Foster stood in the gallery. I have evidence that might interest the court. Judge Thornton frowned. You are? Jake Foster, rancher. I was there the night Harlan's men attacked the Whitfield place. He held up a leather journal. This belonged to Tom Morrison, Harlan's foreman. Found it on him when we captured him. He kept records every family they burned out, every bribe paid, every order from Harlan. It's all here. The courtroom erupted. Dobson leaped up, shouting about inadmissible evidence, while Harlan's face went from confident to pale. Judge Thornton hammered for order. Bailiff, bring me that journal. As the judge examined the book, more drama unfolded. The courtroom doors swung open, admitting a small man in spectacles, Harlan's personal accountant. Sarah realized with shock. Your Honor, the man's voice shook. I need to testify. I can't, my conscience won't let me remain silent. What followed was devastating to Harlan's case. The accountant, granted immunity by Marshal Bennett, detailed years of fraud, intimidation, and bribery. He produced ledgers showing payments to corrupt officials, hired guns, even the forged documents about Thomas. Harlan's lawyers fought viciously, but the tide had turned. When Caleb was called to testify, he spoke simply about defending Sarah's property, about the men who'd come to burn and poison. His past in Amarillo was raised, but Judge Thornton dismissed it as irrelevant to the current matter. Your Honor, Caleb added before stepping down, I've done things I'm not proud of, but defending this woman and her daughter against those who'd harm them, that's something I'll never apologize for. The lunch recess brought chaos. Harlan cornered Sarah outside. His composure finally cracked. You stupid woman, he hissed. You have no idea what you've done. I own this territory. Not anymore. Marshal Bennett appeared beside them. William Harlan, you're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder and fraud. As they led Harlan away, he turned back, eyes promising vengeance. This isn't over, Whitfield. I have friends. So do I, Sarah replied quietly, feeling Caleb's protective presence behind her. The afternoon brought closing arguments. Dobson tried desperately to salvage something, but the evidence was overwhelming. When Judge Thornton finally ruled, his words rang clear. I find in favor of Mrs. Sarah Whitfield on all counts. The water rights and property boundaries stand as originally deeded. Furthermore, based on evidence presented, I'm recommending federal prosecution of Mr. Harlan and his associates for their criminal conspiracy." The courtroom exploded in cheers. Sarah felt her knees buckle, but Caleb was there, holding her up. Emma rushed to them, and they stood together as people pressed forward with congratulations. "It's over," Sarah whispered, hardly believing. "This part is," Caleb agreed. "Still have to rebuild, make the ranch profitable." "Together," he smiled, that rare transforming expression, together. Outside, they found unexpected support. Families who'd stayed silent from fear now approached, offering help. Even some who'd shunned Sarah before expressed admiration for her courage. Reverend Pike stood apart, looking uncomfortable. Finally, he approached. "Mrs. Whitfield, I owe you an apology. I let Harlan's influence cloud my judgment." "We all make mistakes, Reverend." "Yes, well," he cleared his throat. "If you and Mr. Morgan still wish to be married properly." Sarah looked at Caleb, saw her own joy reflected there. "We do." The ceremony took place at sunset in the courthouse square. Half the town attended, turning what might have been a quiet affair into a celebration of justice served. Jake Foster stood as Caleb's witness, while Mrs. Henderson, thoroughly chastened by Harlan's fall, stood with Sarah. "Do you, Caleb Morgan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Pike intoned. "I do." Caleb's voice carried strong and sure. "Do you, Sarah Whitfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." No hesitation, no doubt. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife." When Caleb kissed her, the crowd cheered loud enough to reach the jail where Harlan waited for transport to federal prison. Sarah hoped he heard it, hoped he understood that all his money and influence couldn't break what determination and community had built. As they walked back toward their wagon, Emma between them chattering about having a papa now, Marshal Bennett approached one last time. "That warrant in Amarillo," he said to Caleb. "It's been officially vacated. You're a free man." Caleb shook his hand. "Thank you." "Thank you. Your testimony helped put away one of the biggest land thieves in the territory." He touched his hat to Sarah. "Ma'am, you've got more courage than most men I know. Just protecting what's mine, Marshal, and gaining what's yours," he corrected, glancing at Caleb. "Congratulations to you both." As they drove home beneath stars just beginning to appear, Sarah leaned against her husband's shoulder while Emma dozed in the wagon bed. The ranch waited ahead, damaged but not defeated, challenged but not conquered. "No regrets?" Caleb asked softly. "None." Sarah lifted her face for his kiss. "You?" "Only that it took so long to find you." They rode in comfortable silence, man and wife now in law as they'd been in heart for weeks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding the barn, establishing the ranch, creating a life together from the ashes of their separate griefs. But tonight, with justice served and love declared before God and man, they were simply a family going home. And that, Sarah thought as their land came into view, was victory enough for anyone. The drought would end eventually. The grass would grow again. And on this small piece of frontier, defended with a leaden law and sheer stubborn courage, they would build something lasting, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, community over isolation, and the wild hope of second chances. The spring rains came on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after the trial. Sarah stood in the doorway of their new barn, built stronger and larger than before, watching the drops fall like answered prayers. The drought had broken at last, and with it, the land began its slow resurrection. "Mama, look!" Emma ran through the rain, laughing as she hadn't in over a year. At 8 now, she'd grown taller, stronger, carrying herself with the confidence of a child who'd weathered storms and survived. "You'll catch cold," Sarah called, but she was smiling. Behind her, she heard Caleb's familiar footsteps, felt his arms wrap around her waist. "Let her play," he murmured against her hair. "Lord knows she's earned some joy." They stood together, watching their daughter dance in the rain that would bring life back to their land. The past months had been hard rebuilding, establishing Caleb's legal presence in the community, fighting the lingering effects of Harlan's poison. But they'd managed it together. "Letter came," Caleb said, producing an envelope from his pocket. "From Marshal Bennett." Sarah tensed. Even good news could carry shadows. "What does he say?" "Harlan was convicted on all counts, 20 years in federal prison. His assets are being distributed among the families he wronged." "Including us." "Including us? Not enough to make us rich, but enough to buy those 20 head of cattle we've been wanting. Maybe hire some help come round up." Sarah turned in his arms, studying the face that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. The scar through his eyebrow had faded, and new lines around his eyes came from laughter now, not just sun and sorrow. "We're really going to make it, aren't we?" "Looks that way." He kissed her forehead. "Your husband was a smart man, claiming this land. Good water, good grass when it comes. We'll build something fine here." "Thomas would have liked you," Sarah said softly. It was the first time she'd spoken of her first husband without the sharp edge of grief. "He would have respected what you've done for us." "I hope so. I'm raising his daughter, loving his wife. Man deserves to know his legacy's in good hands." From the yard, Emma's voice carried clear, "Papa, come see the creeks running." "Papa," the word still made Caleb's breath catch. He'd been many things in his 40 years soldier. Wanderer, gun hand, but father was the role that had transformed him most. They walked out together into the soft rain, following Emma to where the creek, dry for so long, now ran with muddy but precious water along its banks. Green shoots already pushed through the earthgrass returning, life asserting itself with frontier stubbornness. "We should plant a garden," Emma declared. "A big one, with corn and beans and those tomatoes, missus. Foster gave us seeds for—" "That's ambitious," Sarah said, but she was already planning where to break ground. "Ambition's good," Caleb agreed. "But first, we finish the fence repairs, then the garden." They spent the morning working despite the rain, a family shaped by hardship into something stronger than any of them had been alone. By noon, the shower had passed, leaving the world washed and gleaming. Jake Foster arrived as they were sitting down to lunch, bringing news from town. "Federal money's starting to flow in for infrastructure. They're talking about a new school, proper roads, town's growing." "Growing honest, you mean," Sarah said, serving him coffee. "That too. Speaking of which." Foster grinned. "There's talk of needing a new sheriff, someone with experience handling rough situations but fair-minded. Interested. Morgan." Caleb shook his head. "Appreciate the thought, but I'm a rancher now. Got all the rough situations I need right here. Can't blame a man for trying. Town could use men like you in charge." "Town's got good men already. Just needed the bad ones cleared out so they could step forward." After Foster left, they returned to work. The ranch demanded constant attention mending, tending, planning. But it was good work, building something rather than destroying. Caleb had taken to it with the same focused intensity he'd once applied to tracking and fighting, finding peace in the rhythm of productive days. As afternoon wore on, more neighbors stopped by. The Hendersons brought a young milk cow, their way of apologizing for past judgments. The widow Martinez, whose husband Harlan had driven to bankruptcy, brought chickens. Even Reverend Pike appeared with his congregation's youth group, ready to help raise a new smokehouse. "It's like the whole county's decided we're worth helping," Sarah marveled as the yard filled with willing workers. "They're not helping," Caleb corrected gently. "They're joining. What you did, standing up to Harlan, it gave them courage. Now they want to be part of what we're building." By evening, the smokehouse frame stood complete. The garden ground was broken, and plans were made for a barn-raising dance the following month. Sarah moved through it all like a woman in a dream, serving food, organizing workers, accepting the community that had once shunned her. As the sun set, painting the rain-washed world in shades of gold and rose, she found herself back at the spring where Thomas had carved their initials. The cottonwood had grown, spreading its branches wider, offering shade that would deepen with years. Caleb found her there, as she'd known he would. Regrets. Memories, she corrected. But no regrets. He pulled her close, and they stood quietly, listening to the spring bubble and flow. From the house came Emma's laughter as she helped set the table for supper, a proper supper now, with plenty for all. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said eventually. "I've been waiting for the right moment." Caleb pulled back to study her face, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "Everything's right. We're going to have a baby." The expression that crossed his face, wonder, joy, a touch of fear made her love him even more. "You're certain?" "Doctor confirmed it yesterday when I went to town for supplies." She smiled at his stunned look. "Late November, he thinks." "A baby!" Caleb repeated it like a prayer. "Our baby." Emma's beside herself with excitement. She's already planning to teach him or her to rope and ride. "Lord help us." But Caleb was grinning, pulling her close again. Another child to raise on this unforgiving land. Another child to teach about courage and community, and choosing love over fear. Sarah countered, "I can't think of any better place for it." They walked back to the house hand in hand, past the new barn and the turned earth of the garden, past the neighbors still lingering to talk and plan. Inside, Emma had indeed set the table with their good plates, the ones from St. Louis that had survived everything. "It's a celebration dinner," she announced, "for the rain and the new calf and the baby and Papa being here and—" "Breathe, little one." Caleb laughed, swinging her up. "That's a lot to celebrate in one meal." "We've got a lot to be thankful for," Emma said seriously. They did indeed. As they sat down together, their small family soon to grow, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here, the grief and drought, the violence and fear, the choice to fight rather than surrender. Every hardship had shaped them, prepared them for this moment of quiet victory. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising more rain. The land would bloom now, fulfilling the promise Thomas had seen when he first claimed it. His dream would live on, tended by hands he'd never imagined but would have trusted the hands of a former gunfighter who'd found redemption in honest work and protective love. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, noticing her contemplative mood. "About trade-offs." Sarah said, "About what we're willing to exchange for what we need." "And—" she smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "And I'm thinking I made the best trade of my life. Exchanged safety for love, propriety for partnership, loneliness for this." "Would you trade 10 herds for one night?" he asked softly, echoing words spoken in desperation months ago, when they'd first admitted their feelings. "For one night inside this life we've built," Sarah squeezed his fingers. "I'd trade 100 herds, 1,000. All the cattle in Texas wouldn't be worth as much as what we have right here." Emma looked between them, not understanding the intensity, but sensing the love. "Are you going to kiss now because the food's getting cold?" They laughed, the moment lightening into something sustainable, not the desperate passion of two broken people clinging together, but the steady warmth of a family choosing each other again and again, in rain and drought, in plenty and want. After supper, as Sarah cleared the dishes and Caleb helped Emma with her letters, she paused to look out the window. The land stretched dark and vast under the stars, no longer threatening but full of promise. Somewhere out there, other families were rebuilding. Other communities were learning to stand together. Their story was just one thread in the great tapestry of the frontier, a story of loss and renewal, of violence transformed into vigilance, of love born from the ashes of grief. But it was their story, earned with blood and tears and the wild courage to hope for better. The widow and the wanderer had become wife and husband, mother and father, defenders of a dream neither had started but both would see fulfilled. And on this small piece of Texas earth, watered by spring rains and determination, they would raise children who knew their worth came not from what others said but from what they chose to build and protect and love. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please comment below and let us know. We'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier stories. And share your thoughts about Sarah and Caleb's journey. What part of their story touched you most? We read every comment and love hearing from our audience.